Chapter 8 of The Adventures of a Nature Guide by Enos Mills. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. The White Cyclone. One bright winter day, while snowshoeing through the San Juan Mountains, I saw a snowslide make a most spectacular run. A many thousand-ton cliff had fallen several hundred feet upon an enormous snow and ice field. I was standing on a ridge above the timberline, with peaks rising high before me, when the crashing echoes warned me of what was happening. The slide's first move was a high dive. The dislodged mass of snow, ice, and stones plunged down an extremely steep, smooth slope. Then it slid and rammed a cliff. As it went on, it rammed various obstructions, and finally started two other avalanches moving. I first caught sight of the snowslide as it struck a low cliff. This contact crushed tons of snow and ice to powder. The snow dust was whirled into a gigantic geyser-like column a few hundred feet wide and more than half a mile high. It remained for several seconds the highest object in the sky, the bright sun and blue heavens behind it, then slowly disbanded. With volume and momentum increasing as it advanced, the slide rushed downward, pursued by an enormous train of curling, whirling snowflower and ice powder, a white cyclone. One glimpse that I had of this gravity-mad monster showed its front rapidly rolling and wildly somersaulting forward. At the bottom of the slope the slide mass must have been 300 feet wide, half as high, and 2 blocks or more long. With the momentum gained in its run, the slide rushed a quarter of a mile up a slope which lay in its path and ascended about 300 feet. The uphill coasting caused telescoping, a shortening in the length, a massing and enlarging of the front. With thousands of tons of rock in its terrible front, it hit a low lateral moraine at right angles, tearing an opening through the top. There was an explosion, with outflying stones and snow, and more telescoping occurred. The top of the slide plunged forward, mingling with the upward, backward hurled front. As it struck, another splendid white dust column rolled up and lingered for a time in the sky. In tearing through the moraine, the snowslide was deflected to the left, where it slid up a moderate slope. Then it curved to the right and started downgrade. On the monster swept. Occasionally a section leaped high and tumbled upon the mass in front. It rounded the face of the slope, cutting a contour in the deep snow and loose stones. Finally it slid out on a level flat, and after a wild coast of 3 miles came to a sudden standstill. In stopping, the bottom appeared to put on brakes and drag heavily the top to pitch forward, and the upbursting bottom to mingle with it. When it stopped, it was a dark dump of convulsed snow that covered an area about 3 blocks long, 1 wide, and perhaps 50 feet deep. The wreckage was a gray, concrete-like mass of snow, earth, gravel, and stones. One summer, a few years later, I saw the remnant of this snowslide. Most of the snow and ice had melted. Viewed from the top of the ridge across which it had rushed, the remaining wreckage appeared like the ruins of a huge building in a little grassy plain. Conies and marmots had taken possession of the crumbling earth and stones. Commonly a snowslide follows a gulch and does not race so wildly. The slide to be feared is the one that takes a new route, running amuck and smashing obstacles. The big slide described was an unusual one of this type. Such a slide may be the result of a snowdrift in a new place, may be caused by the wind blowing from an unusual quarter, or may be started by a land or rock slide or the undermining of an old snow pile. As soon as the slide stopped, I started along the wreck-strewn way over which it had run. It had traveled a crooked course and opened a ragged channel through the snow. Its widest track was nearly 400 feet, but over the most of its meteoric course, its forced passageway was less than 100 feet wide. Off this, most of the snow had been scraped. Every loose and detachable object was carried away. In spots, its snout had gouged into the earth. Along the track were scattered stones and snow piles. A few places showed that the momentum of the slide had caused it to jump without touching the earth. It had leaped one ravine more than 50 feet wide. Tons of shattered rock were swept forward, mostly in the bottom of the slide. At one point, a heavy granite rock thrust up 10 or 12 feet in the track. Striking this caused no perceptible check in its wild speed, but there was a muffled explosion. Stones were flung from the sides and hurled through the top of the slide. Clouds of snow dust were thrown off. This contact must have thrown the internal part of the slide into fierce confusion. In following the open way through which the main slide tore, I found where this slide had started two others, one of which I heard and the other I both saw and heard. Their swift, spectacular careers and their wild, sudden endings were graphically demonstrated, shown in the torn and imprinted snow. These slides were set in motion just after the main slide was well under way. Although I did not see slide number 2, I heard it. Slide number 3 I both saw and heard. At one point, the main slide had dislodged a number of boulders. The small boulders started a miniature slide that, after slipping a short distance, came to a standstill. One boulder must have weighed 50 tons. This enormous fellow had gone bounding down a slope with long leaps, striking a snowdrift and a rock pile which lay at the top of a steep, glaciated incline. Down this incline plunged slide number 2, gathering all the snow and stones along the way. As the slide came into the bottom of the canyon, it hit a small ice-bound lake that lay in a rocky basin, smashing the ice and sweeping out most of the water. The further canyon wall was deluged with water, which promptly froze into a rough ice sheet. The slide, however, continued on its way. Just beyond the lake, it rammed the canyon wall at an angle. Apparently, it was thrown off to the right and turned upside down. Ice cakes and stones were scattered and piled in the bottom of the canyon. Torn and splashed places in the snow far up the canyon walls showed where flying stones had struck. The slide rushed on down the gorge, and after a run of nearly a mile, its terrific momentum caused it to jump completely out of the gorge on the outside of a curve at a point where the wall was low. This ended its career. A high and long enduring dust column ascended from the place where it landed. Gravity is the pull that moves snow as well as water. Slides need a slope for their coasting. On a steep, smooth slope, a comparatively small accumulation or weight of snow will slide off. But if the slope is somewhat flattened or extremely rough, an enormous quantity may be required for the starting, or if the weather be warm, when the first autumn snow falls, it may partly melt and freeze fast. This icy cement will probably endure until spring. Most slides follow the channels of watercourses. Slides may be ordinarily divided into storm, annual, and century. A storm slide may run during or shortly after the snowstorm. The annual supply for the spring will carry most of the winter's accumulation of snow. The century, the accumulation of scores of winters. The century snowslide often does much damage by smashing its way down through forests, making as it were a right-of-way of its own. A storm slide, too, may be a dangerous and damaging one. If there is an unusual fall of snow from an uncommon quarter, or if this snow is drifted in an unusual place, it, like the century slide, will smash down over a new track and leave a line of wreckage behind it. The third slide was also started by the first slide striking a mass of snow and stones in the upper end of a shallow ravine. For more than a mile, this third slide ran on a course parallel with that of the first in a weirdly spectacular race. Then slide number 3 swerved and followed a crescent-shaped course to the right. A succession of short-lived snow clouds were thrown explosively off as it struck obstructions. I caught sight of this slide just as a flock of bighorn sheep rushed out of the snow dust on one side, like frightened people almost struck by a flying express. It is probable that 1 or 2 of the sheep were caught and carried down by the slide. As the dust cleared, 2 injured sheep were seen limping along far behind the others. Another flock, alarmed by the chaotic echoings, rushed upon a cliff. There, in tense and splendid poses, singly and in groups, they watched the rushing slide. This slide ran 2 miles, descending about 1,500 feet. Most of its descent was in the first half mile, and on the last part of its run it moved slowly. At timberline it plunged headlong over a precipice, a leap of about 400 feet, landing upon a steep and heavily forested slope. Several thousand trees were overthrown and smashed to splinters. The striking power of this mass of snow and stones cannot be computed. The slide probably weighed about 200,000 tons. On striking, the flying mass was thrown forward. Stones had bounded in all directions, cutting off trees to right and left. The forest within 200 feet from the slide's landing place was ruined by this short, terrific bombardment. A trainload of stones and many tons of earth were dropped. A part of the slide mass ran on and smashed down through the forest, breaking off or tearing out by the roots every tree in its course. Its path was narrow, about 100 feet, but over this width it ran through the forest for about 700 feet with apparently unchecked speed. At the end of this stretch it plunged into a rocky canyon, nearly filling it with spruce pulp, splinters, cordwood, earthy, convulsed snow, and shattered stones. There were more than 200 annual rings in the trees wrecked here, showing that there had not been a slide at this place for 200 years. In looking over the debris at the bottom of the precipice, I came upon the body of a grizzly bear, badly crushed. Apparently the bear had been torn from his shallow hibernating cave somewhere in the track of the slide, probably a short distance above timberline. Careful search failed to reveal the body of a sheep. Still, there may have been a number of carcasses beneath the smashed trees and wreckage. How quickly all this had happened! I had heard the crash, boom, and rumble and the riot of echoes, and then had seen a surprised snowfield suddenly awakened and rushing forward, wrapped in excited snow dust. Above its resting place I saw the transient, mile-high snow dust pillar silently rise. The echoes ceased, and this dust monument quickly vanished. End of chapter 8.